Hello, everyone, and welcome to the panel, Big Books from Small Presses, Young Adult and Young Readers. My name is Elizabeth Libberton, and I'll be your moderator. All of our books today are in the middle grade to young adult range, and we're going to be talking about everything from romance to space travel. I'm going to go ahead and start introducing our authors. We have Kat Cho, author of Wish Upon a K-Star from Disney. We have E.K. Johnston, author of Titan of the Stars from Tundra. Kerry Madden-Lunsford, author of Werewolf Hamlet from Charlesbridge Moves. Natalie Naudus, author of Gay the Pray Away from QK Quirk Books. And Whitney D. Grandison, author of Playing Hard from Wattpad, will not be able to join us today, but I'll be telling you a little bit about her book after we get everything started and everyone gets a chance to answer at least their first question. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And then Natalie, you're going to be my first question. So our first one is, in Gay the Pray Away, that starts with a very personal note that you just kind of give right away to the reader. What does this note mean to you, and what do you really want your readers to kind of take away from seeing that step one?
Hey, thanks for having me. Um, yeah, my book is very personal. It's based on my childhood and as an adult looking back and realizing that I grew up in a Christian homeschooling cult. And I just hope that it is a gentle way to help readers who grew up in that kind of environment to heal from what was very traumatic, in as gentle and as kind and loving a way as possible.
Thank you. And that is such a great point too, especially like at the librarian setting when I have students come and look at books. Lots of times if things are going to be triggering, I love that it has a note in the front for them to kind of look at beforehand too. And that way they can see if it's, like what they see as a mirror versus what could be something as a window into somebody else's experience. So love that. Our next question is for EK. So in Titan of the Stars, it's a science fiction horror novel that is definitely going to keep readers on the edge of their pages. What inspired you to write this book? It's such an interesting idea from beginning to end.
So the inspiration for this book is a little bit different because I wrote it for a book packager, which means I was hired. And the inspiration wasn't so much the idea, but the fact that when I emailed back with like, here's 14 things I would like to change. One, I didn't have to explain any of them. David Purse, the guy at Inked Entertainment, knew exactly what I would do with each of the 14 changes. And then he was totally behind them as well. So the inspiration on this point was mostly a collaboration, sort of getting to work with someone who clearly wanted to collaborate with me, which is not super common in publishing sometimes. So it was kind of a neat new spin on something for me.
You. All right, our next question is for Kerry. So Kerry, in Werewolf Hamlet, it's definitely for readers who love humor because there's so much humor kind of woven into all of the dialogue. When you're thinking about, what kind of got you into that, to think about that witty banter your main character Angus has just throughout with family, with friends, like how did you come up with that?
Um, that's such a great question. I really let my characters talk to each other. I did have a friend who said, there are no quiet moments in this novel. And so between each chapter that I put in interludes because they're a loud family. But it was a lot of how I grew up. Our kids grew up doing theater, and we had, discussions. It's inspired a lot by just letting them they get out of their way and talk to each other. So I think I hope that answers the question.
No, it does. And it really does read that way because it very just sounds like, right, like a family talking or just like how he interacts with the other people in his family, but also like his friends too. And yeah.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
And then our next question is for Kat. So Kat, Wish Upon a K-Star features Moonster, which is the bandmate of Robbie, that was from your previous novel, Once Upon a K-Star. What about Moonster's character made you feel like his story wasn't over and you wanted to keep going and see what was next for him?
Oh, well, I kind of grew up on romance novels, and what I love about when there's more than one novel like within a universe is that we get to see like what actually is going on with side characters because it's always a new couple. And when I was writing Once Upon a K-Prom, like I always just wanted to know what Munster was thinking at all times. Like, he's the funny man. He's the one who always lightens the atmosphere and makes everyone laugh. But I always feel like people who are the ones who are making everyone laugh have like something deeper going on. Like, he's not broken or anything, but he has secrets, and I wanted to explore those more. And it helped that a lot of fans would just bring him up to me. And I was like, okay, I think you guys also would love to hear more from this character. So it made it an easy choice.
Thank you so much. All right, now, after we've had a chance to just kind of do one question for everybody, I am going to take a moment to just kind of tell you a little bit about Whitney D. Grandison's book, which is Playin Hard, and it's a romance novel that blends sports, and it's an enemies to lovers story. Cree is one of her main characters, has loved to dance, and DeAndre is very much a part of like that basketball clique at their school. Cree can't stand DeAndre's group of friends until a debate in class kind of gets them talking. And then Cree and DeAndre have to learn to navigate like high school life, family, love together because they're kind of like an unlikely pair. So that's kind of just a little bit about what her book focuses on. And now we're going to jump back into our questions. So Natalie, you're next. The next question I had for you was trusting yourself and how you feel is a huge theme throughout your entire novel. And it just speaks to like who you are, like thinking about, I feel this way, but then how do I trust that what I feel is right? When you were thinking about that and writing Valerie's story, what was the most powerful way that you kind of took that, or how did you kind of come up with this idea to write this and this trusting yourself theme?
Yeah, it's very much something that I've had to learn since childhood. I was homeschooled and raised extremely conservatively, and I was definitely taught that my feelings are incorrect and that I can't trust myself. I can't trust my feelings. I need to trust what is told to me and what people tell me that God tells me. And I wanted to have a character who really goes through that journey of realizing, oh, I have feelings. Maybe I can pay attention to them. Maybe feelings are okay, and maybe they don't make me a bad person. It was really very much my own personal journey, and then writing it in and trying to send healing to people who maybe grew up in a similar situation.
Thank you so much. The next one is for EK. So EK, your story switches perspectives between two kind of main characters. You have Celeste as a ship worker, and then you have Dominic as the passenger. And having those multiple perspectives, how did you kind of think about that as to help you tell the story of the Titan and what happened on their voyage?
I think one of the things that I knew from the get-go of the story is that because it is using the Titanic as one of the sources for it, it was always going to be about class differences and all of the ridiculous things that we do to other people just because they don't have as much money or because they're from a different country. And so I knew that having those two perspectives would start off with a wildly different idea of what was going on the ship. And the closer they get to realizing what's actually happening, the scarier it gets, but also the more true to what is actually happening becomes apparent.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it really is interesting because when you see your story from beginning to end, you have this feel of like the Titanic from the start because you're seeing like, okay, here's what's going to happen in a backflash. And then when you get all this like kind of the science part and the alien part kind of embedded, it really is like a horror story on the Titanic in the future on a spaceship. It's really interesting. Our next one is for Kerry. So Kerry, Angus sees his older brother like a werewolf, and that's like the theme throughout, connecting, right, that werewolf to Hamlet feel. And when you think about that change in front of your eyes, like puberty, growing up, like what does that look like as you become a teenager? It's such a cool way to kind of phrase that and turn it to make it an accessible way of like a sibling, right? Like, how do I see my sibling change? And is that like werewolf feel that they're, crazy at times, but then normal in themselves. And you see those little peek throughs of like, we used to be friends, but then that kind of goes away quickly. How did you come up with this idea to really hit home that relationship issue in that way of like that kind of you're, you change, you switch, you're this werewolf.
Um, uh, that's another great question. So my son grew up, he was obsessed with werewolves. In fact, I picked him up from preschool once and he had cut all the top of his hair off the middle of his head and his head and tried to glue it to his arms. And his teacher was horrified because she thought and I just was like, he's really quick. It could happen to anybody. I wasn't even, so we just went to supercuts. But that just like living, so it was a lot of memories growing up with this really imaginative kid. And then I just thought, we've struggled with, we also have been on a path with addiction in our family, and it really is like somebody transforming before your eyes, and there's nothing to be done. And so when I started writing this, I thought, what if I used the werewolf Hamlet, or werewolves, and then he also wanted to put on Hamlet as a little boy, but then these girls wanted to do Annie. So there was so many things that I just drew on. I totally used my kids. But anyway, that was a little bit of how it came to be. Yeah, it's that transformation, and then just trying to find, and that's why I think the humor is really important, because it is serious. But I also had to put a note on my desk that said it's for kids, because I would get my own anxiety-ridden mother in there, and so I had to knock her out and just like really be in a kid's voice. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you. All right, the next question is for Kat. So Kat, it's definitely an enemies to lovers romance situation for you too. And so they start off, Moonster and Hiyari are just like, we don't care for each other. We have to learn what each other are, who we are. And when they start off in this way, then sparks start to fly. And when you think about a progression of a romance, how was it writing that? Or like, what kind of things do you think about when you're writing the progression of a romance, like throughout?
I think when I write any relationship, whether it's romantic or, a friendship or a family relationship, I definitely like want to start out with understanding like the misunderstandings between the two characters and how that affects how they see each other. And then figure out like, okay, well, what's the most organic path for them to unpack these misunderstandings where it's like has meaningful growth for them, not just like, oh, you were wrong. Oh, okay. Like, let's get along now. Like that doesn't feel like a worthwhile payout to the readers, I don't think. So it was definitely important for me to explore the past between these characters. They knew each other as like not kids, but like juveniles. They were in the trainee system in K-pop, which if anyone knows, it's hell. It's like very, very hard. And so that kind of put a lot of pressures on them. And then, you take out things on the people you're closest to, right? So it's kind of them like realizing like that the things they did to each other in the past were because of their situation, not because of how they felt about each other. And that was really important for me, not just for this relationship, but like there's other relationships in the story that are like friendships or family. And it's kind of a running theme actually in the book. So it was very important for me for them to like realize that sometimes, it's not your fault that you did something in the past, but you should own up to it in order to move forward.
Thank you. All right, the next one is for Natalie. So Natalie, in your novel, family and faith threaten the romantic relationship between Valerie and Riley, even just right from the get when their friendship's kind of starting off. This is a real and authentic conflict your readers may experience. How did that change your approach in writing their love story?
I definitely, I read a lot, and I actually record audiobooks as my day job, and I record a lot of romance. And my favorite kind of romances is when the conflict comes up like from outside the couple. Um, Maybe that's just me. I love when couples communicate well and get along well, because in real life, that's what I would like. So I wanted their love to be very like pure and easy, because everything outside of it is difficult. And that feels realistic sometimes in my experience.
Thank you. The next one is for EK. So your book has a Titanic in space feel right from the beginning, as readers get a glimpse into that end of the story before it begins. Did the story, and how did it? Because you just kind of, you said it already, right? It kind of, the Titanic did inspire, you know, where this kind of jumped from. So where was that in the writing process, and how did you kind of like push that together to make your story?
So the original pitch that David gave to me was Titanic by way of Alien. And I was 13 in 1997 when James Cameron's Titanic was like taking over every teenager in 2 countries at least. But I never actually saw it, which I think makes me a stochastic anomaly. And so I did, however, go through a Titanic phase because that was the first movie that I really remember there being a lot of behind the scenes stuff available for, because James Cameron was going to make an accurate movie and he was going to make sure everybody knew it. So there were all these books and arts and behind the scenes and all that kind of stuff. And it was the first time I was really aware of how a movie was made. And so I got that kind of picture. I can probably describe the whole movie, even though I've never really seen it. Also, Celine Dion is Canadian, so we saw that music video and heard that song a lot for the next few years. And so same with Alien. I haven't really seen it, but because I'm a terrible coward and I can't watch horror movies. But I knew the story very well. And it also is about something that I am deeply interested in, which is corporate greed and how that affects people. And so, you know, putting that and class differences in the void of space just makes everything extra scary. And you can kind of run from there. So it's not really inspired by like the movie Titanic, but it is inspired by the Titanic, because I did have that sort of fascination, and mostly through Doctor Who, which gives it an interesting twist. So you have that sort of sci-fi and horror aspect playing as well.
Thank you so much. All right, our next one is for Kerry. So Kerry, your story was really interesting and visually appealing with those page breaks. And you kind of referenced it earlier, like you kind of wanted to have these spots where you stop and the story, like the dialogue kind of stops, or it just starts where it's like just pages of dialogue. And you're looking at different parts of it that are like, you know, conversations, but there's also some transcripts, and then you have like some play pieces in there too. So how did you decide which features to put, and then how did you decide where?
Well, the conversations between the brothers came from that first comment of no quiet moments. So those were my editor. I had a wonderful editor, and so Karen Boss. So she calls them the interludes. So those are the late at night conversations, and then Angus calls upon in his it's L.A. is also a character, so he calls upon the ghosts of Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, Lon Chaney, and Harry Houdini to give him advice sometimes. And then he also has, so that was one, so those are like sort of the on the roof scenes, I guess, or just, you know, but then he has these moments in his head where how life should be. You know, like his teacher, werewolves are not appropriate. Are they appropriate for 5th grade? No, that's what his teacher is like. She's axing his, you know, creative project or that he wants to do. So I kept thinking, okay, there were just times when you want something to go a certain way. So I would just let him like play it over in his mind. So it was mainly just like, and I am a playwright, so it was really fun because I had other earlier drafts of this book where they would go, oh, you can't do that. You're not allowed to do that. But my Charlesbridge really let me play and let me like, please, let's just step outside and let this be a play. Let this be a scene. Let this be. And then the book designer was the one who set the pages apart with the interludes that look really, I never would have thought of that. I love how they did that. So.
Thank you. Yeah, and I mean, I will say, like, especially knowing too that if like someone would challenge that part to you, I mean, that is when reading through it, one of the things that I know that readers, like student readers, are going to gravitate to, because I have so many students who, you know, will look at a page and say, okay, if there's a break or something interesting, like differently visually, it pulls them and keeps them going. I mean, especially even middle school to high school students, that's definitely a thing. So
and when I've done readings, I actually have 2 kids take over the brother parts or do the parts, and then then I'm not. It gets to be much more of a communal thing rather than me just reading to them. So it's fun. And they perform it.
yeah, I was gonna say then you get that like theater feel, because then they're actually kind of like performing it together. That's awesome. Thank you. All right, our next question is for Kat. So, Kat, both Moonster and Hiyari deal with pressure from the public and their families throughout the novel. When you started writing the story, did you ultimately know where the pressure would take the romance, or did you just kind of evolve it as you wrote through it?
Both. Um, yeah, so uh, I I definitely want like this book and the other rom-com that I wrote. I wanted them to be like sweet and lovely and like escapism. And it's, I mean, it's K-pop, like it's bright and shiny, but at the same time, like I've been a fan of K-pop my whole entire life. And I think it would be disservice to like ignore like the intense pressures and like the not great parts of fame. And these are teenagers who are super duper famous, like on a global level. And there's so like parasocial relationship, there's a lot of pressures for them. And Korea, unfortunately, is still a patriarchal society. So it's different for boys versus girls. And I didn't do it on purpose, but I realized like halfway through writing it that there's all of these symbols about how Moonster is way more protected than Kerry. Like she's a girl, so like there's so much higher expectations of her. Like her diet is way more controlled. Like there's much more opinions about how she looks, how she acts, how she dresses, everything. And he's a boy, so he gets to be like goofy and weird, and people just think it's so charming. And he has a stage name, which is like representative of the fact that he has a protection from the world. He's Moonster. He's not his actual like birth name. She doesn't. She's just Hieri to everybody, to her family, to her fans. So there were like little things like that, details that really mattered to me. And then when I thought about like how each of them separately experienced fame, that kind of created the conflict between them a lot of the time, where like something was so much more important to her because she knew how much more it could snowball out of control for her career, for her image. And he just didn't have to worry about stuff like that to the level that she did. And it creates a lot of the conflict early on in the book for them. And it was a learning experience for him because he is more famous than her, he is more protected than her. So even though he still has to deal with like fandoms and pressures and parasocial relationships, it's just not the same for him. And I just really wanted to address that for them. But it's also how they come together, because the way he grows and the way that he supports her becomes very, very important for their relationship. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. And that kind of leads us into our next question, because our next question is for Natalie and for Kat. So both of your stories have romance at the core and the heart of it, really, from beginning to end. And what's the best part of writing a young adult romance? Because that has to be interesting, because you're going from like, we don't want it to be like too adult, but we want it to be adult enough because our readers are almost adults or pretty much getting there. So how do you balance that? What does that look like? And what's the best parts of writing books for teens? And we can do Natalie first and then go to Kat.
I found that falling in love for the first time for me was absolutely transformative. It was so beautiful and wonderful, and it threw into question everything that I'd been told about um, how I was sinful and my feelings of love were something to be like kept out of the way, and I was supposed to like save myself for marriage, and all of that just went out the window when I fell in love because it felt so good. I was like, how could any of this be wrong? Um, and so I really leaned into that feeling, and I love that feeling of loving without fear, and it's just like the best thing that has ever happened to you. And I really just I love that vibe and leaning into that. Um, I did have to think about like how much on-screen physicality I wanted to portray, and I leaned away from that personally, but I know it's like I know that it's something that kids do sometimes need to think about and talk about, but I didn't feel like it was the right place in my book personally. I kept things pretty PG-13.
I love the way that you describe like young love, Natalie. It makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. I can't wait to read your book. Um, I feel a very similar way about it. One of the things that I also wanted to focus on was like the awkwardness of being a teenager falling in love. I mean, that's the theme of my teenage years, so it would be hard for me to write a romance that didn't include like the most embarrassing moments. At least you think it's the most embarrassing in the moment. And like you just want to hide or, you know, change your name and move somewhere else. And then the height in my books, like there's the heightened fact of like they're celebrities. So they're supposed to be suave and cool and sexy, but they're just like teenagers. So you know, in K-Star, she had a huge crush on him when she was a kid. Like when she was like 13 years old, she just had a huge crush on him and he knew. And when she found out that he knew, it was just the worst moment ever. And I loved writing that scene, even though she was humiliated, just because I was like, yep, this is indicative of like my entire teenage life. So it was like kind of important for me to show those moments because I just feel like it's just like a rite of passage. But then at the same time, like once you do realize, oh, they feel the same way, like they become your safe space. And I also loved writing that too. It's like just, you know, everything is so much more heightened when you're that age. Everything is so much more important because it's the first time you're feeling it. And I love writing those moments because it just envelopes you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. All right, now our next question and our last big question is for EK and Kerry together. And so for both of you, both of your stories feature characters who feel like they have something to prove, like to themselves, to the outside world, to friends, like, you know, who am I outside? With the creation of Celeste in your book, EK, and then with Angus in your book, Kerry, how did you craft these characters in a way that gets the reader rooting for the success of them? Like, how do you build that up so the reader is like, okay, I want them to succeed in this, and you kind of, they can feel that.
I can go first, I guess. So one of the things that I had suggested to David when I sent him my list of 14 things was that I wanted Celeste and Dominic to switch places. Dominic was originally the engineer and Celeste was the artist. And I was like, I'm going to flip them. I hope that's okay. And David was like, yeah, because then you can do this. And I was like, yes, that's exactly why I want to do it. And it probably was actually the deal breaker when it came to like actually being able to write the book. Was like, if he had said no, I would have had to be like, I'm sorry, you have to find somebody else for this project. But he said yes. And that gave me Celeste, who is an engineer, but she's not an engineer in like the STEM kind of way. She's an engineer in the like self-taught mechanic kind of way. Because she is desperate to leave the planet Earth. And I was like, why would she be desperate to leave the planet Earth? And then there was a news article about how the Ottawa Rift Valley could just go at any point, and there's nothing we could do about it. And it would be like a 6.4 or something like that. And that would just be it. Like the whole city of Ottawa, most of Kingston, done. And I was like, that feels like a good reason to leave Earth. So she survives that as a child and grows up in a series of increasingly awful government-funded foster homes. And this is her big shot. And I think that a lot of times teenagers maybe aren't in that dire of situations. But I grew up in a small town and I wanted to leave more than anything when I was little. And in hindsight, that was ridiculous. And I live in a small town now quite happily. But at the time, I really wanted to leave. And I think that that is a big part of coming of age and a big part of being a teenager. Whether or not you end up staying or going can really kind of affect who you are for the rest of your life.
I love that answer too. These are great. I want to read everybody's book. Yeah, I mean, I think Angus, being that he really is quintessentially the middle child, and so Liam steals a lot of the show, and then there's a big sister Hannah who just can't wait to get away to Maine. They live in LA, and Maine is the furthest point for her, and so she's, I'm going to Maine. She has no interest in Hollywood or any of that nonsense. And then Sydney, the little girl, is the fairy child. So Angus, he's trying to be heard. And then I had a really good friend. Also, I had another good friend read it, and she said, if you don't, she goes, it was about, I did an empathy draft, and she goes, if you don't make Angus more empathetic, he's going to be as narcissistic as Liam. And I was like, oh. So I really did an empathy draft where because he was like me, we're doing Werewolf Hamlet, but then it's like, his friend Zora is doing the school garden, and another friend is doing something else. So I wanted to make him pay attention to his friends and his siblings more than I had in an earlier draft where he was like being persecuted or whatever. So but he has this passion to put on this show, and Miss Loudermilk, the teacher, she is not interested. And so that is, he's got to find his way around her. And yet, and also his parents, the dad is a failed actor. The mom is like a coach with a whistle who's out, so the parents they're not on their game at all. They're just, everybody's kind of spinning out. So he's just trying to find his voice in the cacophony of it all, and prove himself and save his brother, because his brother's the one he loves so much. So yeah, great questions. I can't wait to read these books.
Thank you so much. And really, thank you to everyone. I would second that all of these books were amazing to read, and they are all worth every time, every minute you have, because they were all so good in so different ways. And we were really lucky in this panel to get such a large view of them and a large range of stuff. It wasn't just one genre. We got a lot of different kind of space that was covered, which is always awesome. Thanks to our speakers for this fantastic discussion, and thanks to all the librarians who joined us today. Next, we have the final session of the day, which is the closing keynote with Matt De La Pena and Lauren Long. And thank you, everyone.